The morning sun cast long shadows across Piedra Seca Ranch, illuminating the weathered face of Hector Mendoza as he leaned against the fence post, watching with weary eyes as three ranch hands struggled with the wild stallion in the corral. The magnificent black horse reared up, nostrils flaring, eyes wild with defiance. Its powerful legs kicked at the air as it fought against the ropes that held it. "Careful, Manuel!" Hector shouted as one of the men narrowly avoided a crushing blow from the horse's hooves. "That devil will kill you if you're not watching." The stallion, they called him Diablo for his pitch-black coat and untamable spirit, had been brought to the ranch 3 weeks ago. Hector had purchased him at auction despite warnings from other ranchers. The horse had already injured 2 previous owners and had a reputation throughout the region as unbreakable. But Hector, with his stubborn pride and dwindling finances, had seen the stallion as an opportunity. A horse with Diablo's bloodline and strength could command a high price if properly trained, or better yet, could sire foals that would restore the ranch's declining fortunes. Now, as Diablo snapped at Manuel's arm, barely missing flesh, Hector wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. The ranch was already hanging by a thread. His wife Isabella had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving him to manage everything alone. The drought had killed off much of their cattle, the bills kept mounting, and now this devil of a horse was consuming valuable time and resources with no progress to show for it. "Enough," Hector finally called out, waving his hand. "Let him be for today. We're just making him angrier." The men looked relieved as they carefully backed away from the stallion, who continued to snort and paw at the ground, eyes following their every move. They secured the corral gate, and Diablo immediately galloped to the far end, head held high as if celebrating another victory against his captors. Manuel approached Hector, wiping sweat from his brow. "Boss, I don't think this one can be broken. 3 weeks and we can't even get a saddle on him. Maybe it's time to cut our losses." Hector sighed, removing his worn straw hat to run a hand through his graying hair. "Give it 1 more week. If nothing changes, I'll sell him to Rodriguez. He mentioned wanting him for breeding, even unbroken. For half what you paid," Manuel reminded him gently. I know. Hector replaced his hat, squinting at the sun climbing higher in the cloudless sky. Another day without rain. Another day of struggle. As the men dispersed to attend to other duties, Hector remained at the fence, watching Diablo. The stallion had calmed somewhat, now trotting the perimeter of the corral with a proud, defiant gait. There was something majestic about him, the ripple of muscles beneath his gleaming coat, the intelligence in his dark eyes. Such a waste of potential. A cloud of dust on the distant road caught Hector's attention. A vehicle was approaching, unusual for this time of day. He wasn't expecting visitors. As it drew closer, he recognized his brother Miguel's old pickup truck, rattling down the dirt path that led to the ranch house. Miguel wasn't due to visit for another month. Something must be wrong. Hector hurried toward the house, reaching the front yard just as the truck pulled up. Miguel stepped out, looking tired from the 3-hour drive from the city. But it wasn't his brother that caught Hector's attention. It was the girl who emerged from the passenger side. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. Thin and small for her age, with long dark hair tied back in a simple braid. She wore jeans, a faded blue t-shirt, and carried a small worn backpack clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes, large and dark, took in the ranch with a wary, almost fearful expression. "Miguel," Hector greeted his brother with a brief embrace. "Wasn't expecting you." "I know," Miguel replied, keeping his voice low. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced." He glanced at the girl, who remained standing by the truck, her gaze now fixed on the ground. "This is Luna Vega. She's going to be staying with you for a while." Hector's brow furrowed. "Staying with me? What are you talking about?" Miguel sighed, pulling his brother a few steps away. "She's Carmen Vega's daughter." The name hit Hector like a physical blow. Carmen Vega, a woman he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. A woman who had once meant everything to him, before life and circumstances had pulled them in different directions. "Carmen," he whispered. Is she? She passed away last month, Miguel said softly. Cancer. It happened quickly. Hector felt a hollowness spread through his chest. Carmen, gone from this world. He looked at the girl again, seeing now the resemblance, the same delicate features, the same watchful eyes. Luna has no other family, Miguel continued. Carmen named you as her guardian in her will. I've been trying to reach you, but your phone service been cut off for 2 weeks, Hector admitted. The bills, always the bills. I know this is sudden, but there's nowhere else for her to go. The alternative is foster care, and Carmen was adamant that shouldn't happen. Hector ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of this new responsibility pressing down on him. How could he possibly take care of a teenage girl? The ranch was failing. He could barely keep his workers paid, and he knew nothing about raising children. He and Isabella had never been blessed with any. There's something else you should know, Miguel added, his voice dropping even lower. Luna doesn't speak, hasn't spoken a word since her mother fell ill, according to the neighbors. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong. It's some kind of trauma response. She understands everything, but she just doesn't talk. Hector looked at the girl again. She had raised her eyes and was now staring toward the corral where Diablo could be seen pacing. There was something in her expression, a flicker of interest breaking through the mask of grief. I can't just take her in, Miguel, Hector protested, though his resolve was already weakening. Look at this place. I'm 1 bad month away from losing everything. What kind of home is that for a grieving child? It's what Carmen wanted, Miguel said simply. And it's only for a year or so until Luna turns 18. Then she can decide her own path. Hector sighed deeply. How could he refuse Carmen's final wish? Despite the years and distance between them, he owed her that much. And looking at the lost, silent girl standing in his yard, he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. Fine, he conceded. She can stay, but I don't know the first thing about teenage girls. Miguel smiled for the first time since arriving. Neither does she, from what I can tell. She's always been quiet, even before. Everything. Keeps to herself. Won't be much trouble. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is from Carmen's insurance. It's not much, but it should help with Luna's expenses. Hector took the envelope reluctantly. I'll set up Isabella's old sewing room for her. They walked back to Luna, who was still watching the distant corral with unusual intensity. Luna, Miguel said gently. This is Hector. You'll be staying with him now, like your mother wanted. The girl turned her gaze to Hector, studying him with those solemn eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, but no smile, no other reaction. Let's get you settled in, Hector said awkwardly. You must be tired from the journey. Luna picked up her backpack and followed Hector toward the house. Miguel brought a small suitcase from the truck, apparently all the possessions she had in the world. The ranch house was modest, but solidly built, with thick adobe walls that kept it cool even in the summer heat. Hector led Luna to Isabella's sewing room, which had remained largely untouched since his wife's passing. The sight of the dusty sewing machine and half-finished projects still brought a pang to his heart. It's not much, he said, opening the window to let in fresh air. But it's yours now. We can clean it up, make it more suitable. Luna set her backpack down on the small bed and looked around the room. Her expression remained unreadable, but she ran her fingers gently over the colorful threads still arranged in Isabella's sewing basket. Then she turned to Hector and nodded again. Acceptance, or perhaps gratitude. It was hard to tell. I'll let you get settled, he said, backing toward the door. There's a bathroom down the hall. Kitchen's open anytime you're hungry. She didn't respond, just stood there in the middle of the room, looking small and out of place among Isabella's belongings. Outside, Miguel was preparing to leave. I can't stay, he explained. Got to get back to the city tonight. Work tomorrow. You're just dropping her off and running? Hector asked incredulously. I've spent 2 weeks sorting out Carmen's affairs, arranging the funeral, dealing with paperwork. My boss won't extend my leave. Miguel's expression softened. I'll come back to check on her as soon as I can. Maybe in a couple of weeks? Hector wanted to argue, but knew it would be pointless. Fine. Drive safely. After Miguel departed in a cloud of dust, Hector stood in the yard, feeling utterly unprepared for this turn of events. Carmen Vega's daughter. Here, on his failing ranch. A girl who didn't speak, who carried grief like a shadow. What was he supposed to do with her? Manuel approached from the direction of the barn. Boss, who was that? And who's the girl? Her name is Luna, Hector replied, still staring at the disappearing truck. She's going to be living here for a while. She's the daughter of an old friend. Manuel raised an eyebrow but didn't pry further. We've got problems with the south well pump again, and Rodriguez called. He's coming by tomorrow to look at Diablo. Hector nodded absently. I'll look at the pump in a bit. As Manuel walked away, Hector turned back toward the house. Through the window he could see Luna standing in her new room, staring out at the vast, dry landscape of the ranch. He wondered what she was thinking, what she was feeling behind that silent exterior. One thing was certain. Life at Piedra Seca Ranch had just become considerably more complicated. Dinner that night was an awkward affair. Hector had never been much of a cook. Isabella had handled that part of their life together. After her passing, he'd subsisted mainly on simple meals: beans, tortillas, the occasional stew when Manuel's wife Maria took pity on him and brought over a pot. Tonight, he'd scrambled eggs and warmed tortillas, setting the table for two instead of his usual solitary plate. Luna sat across from him, her small hands folded in her lap, waiting until he gestured for her to begin. She ate slowly, methodically, her eyes mostly fixed on her plate. Occasionally she would glance up at him, as if studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. The silence was oppressive. Hector had never been a talkative man, but he found himself desperately searching for something to say. "The eggs okay?" he asked finally. Luna nodded, the movement so slight it was barely perceptible. Good, good." He cleared his throat. "So, you're 17. Miguel mentioned you'll be finishing school soon." Another nod. "Well, the school in town isn't much, but I suppose we can arrange for you to finish out the year there. It's about 30 minutes by car." Luna's expression didn't change, but she reached for her backpack, which she'd kept close by, and pulled out a small notebook. She wrote something quickly and turned it toward him. "Homeschooled," Hector read aloud. "You've been homeschooled?" She nodded again. "I see." Hector rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Well, I'm not sure I can help much with that. I never finished high school myself." Luna wrote again. "I have materials. Just need quiet place to study." "That we have plenty of," Hector said with a short laugh. "Quiet and dust. In abundance." The ghost of a smile flickered across Luna's face, so brief he almost missed it. Then she returned to her eggs, and the silence settled over them once more. After dinner, Luna helped clear the table without being asked. Her movements were efficient and practiced. Clearly, she was used to household chores. She washed the dishes while Hector dried them, the two of them working in a strangely comfortable rhythm despite the silence. "I have to check on the animals before turning in," Hector said as they finished. "You'll be okay here?" Luna nodded, then hesitated. She made a gesture with her hands, as if asking if she could come along. "You want to come with me?" Hector asked, surprised. She nodded, her expression showing interest for the first time since her arrival. "All right then." He grabbed a flashlight from beside the door. "Not much to see in the dark, but I suppose you should get to know the place." They stepped out into the cool night air. The sky above was vast and clear, stars scattered like silver dust across the blackness. Luna tilted her head back, eyes widening slightly at the spectacular view. "One good thing about being so far from the city," Hector commented, following her gaze. "Best stars you'll ever see." They walked toward the barn, where most of the ranch's few remaining horses were stabled for the night. Hector introduced each one by name as they passed. Old Bonita, the gentle mare he used for easy rides. Capitan, a sturdy gelding used for herding. And Estrella, a young filly with promise. Luna reached out tentatively to stroke Estrella's nose, and the horse nuzzled against her palm. "She likes you," Hector observed. Luna's face softened, and she continued petting the filly with gentle strokes. When they reached the last stall, Hector paused. "This is Santiago, Isabella's horse." His voice grew quieter. "He's getting old now, but he was her pride and joy." The aging Palomino approached the stall door, and Hector stroked his golden mane with obvious affection. Luna watched the interaction, noting the tenderness in this otherwise gruff man's hands. After checking that all the horses had water, Hector led Luna outside again. He hesitated, then pointed toward the separate corral where Diablo was kept. "That's where we keep the new stallion. Best to stay away from him. He's wild, that one. Dangerous." But Luna was already walking toward the corral, drawn by curiosity. Hector hurried after her. "Luna, wait. He's not safe." In the moonlight, they could make out Diablo's dark form. The stallion was standing alert, his ears pricked forward at the sound of their approach. Unlike the other horses, he showed no signs of settling for the night. His powerful body seemed coiled with energy, ready to explode at any moment. When they reached the fence, Hector kept a cautious distance. "That's Diablo. Bought him at auction 3 weeks ago, but no one's been able to get near him without risking life and limb." Luna stood at the fence, watching the stallion with rapt attention. Diablo stared back, his dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. For a long moment, girl and horse regarded each other across the distance. Then, to Hector's astonishment, Luna climbed onto the lowest rail of the fence. "Luna, no," he warned, reaching for her arm. "He's dangerous." But she shook off his hand, giving him a look that clearly asked for trust. Reluctantly, Hector stepped back, ready to intervene if necessary. Luna perched on the fence rail, making no move to enter the corral. Instead, she simply sat there, watching Diablo. The stallion snorted, pawing at the ground suspiciously. He took a few steps forward, then back, clearly uncertain about this small intruder. Minutes passed. Hector remained tense, expecting Diablo to charge or rear at any moment. But gradually, the stallion's aggressive stance relaxed slightly. He continued to watch Luna with wary interest, neither approaching nor retreating. Finally, Luna slipped down from the fence. She turned to Hector and wrote in her notebook, "Beautiful horse." "Beautiful and deadly," Hector replied. "Rodriguez is coming tomorrow to look at him. I'm thinking of selling." Something flickered in Luna's eyes, disappointment perhaps, but she merely nodded and followed Hector back to the house. That night, lying in his bed, Hector found sleep elusive. The events of the day kept replaying in his mind. Miguel's unexpected arrival, the news of Carmen's death, and now her daughter under his roof. Carmen Vega. He hadn't allowed himself to think of her in years, but now memories flooded back. Her laugh, the scent of her hair, the dreams they'd once shared. How strange that her daughter would come to him now, silent and mysterious, a living reminder of what might have been. And then there was the ranch. Rodriguez's interest in Diablo represented a potential lifeline, not enough to solve all his problems, but perhaps enough to keep the bank at bay for another month or two. Yet selling the stallion felt like admitting defeat. Hector had bought him with such high hopes, imagining how the bloodline could revitalize his breeding program. With a sigh, he turned over, punching his pillow into shape. No use dwelling on it now. Morning would come soon enough, bringing Rodriguez and decisions that couldn't be postponed. Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day. Hector rose early, as was his habit, and was surprised to find Luna already in the kitchen. She'd made coffee and was sitting at the table with a textbook open before her. "Morning," he said, pouring himself a cup. "Sleep okay?" She nodded, then returned to her studies. Hector noticed dark circles under her eyes that suggested otherwise, but he didn't press the issue. Everyone had a right to their private struggles. After a quick breakfast, Hector headed out to meet with Manuel and prepare for Rodriguez's visit. They spent the morning fixing a section of fence that had fallen into disrepair and discussing how best to present Diablo to the potential buyer. "We should try to get a saddle on him," Manuel suggested. "Rodriguez will pay more if he thinks the horse can be ridden." "And risk getting our heads kicked in?" Hector shook his head. "No, we'll sell him as is, a breeding stallion with excellent bloodlines. That should be enough." Manuel looked skeptical, but didn't argue. They both knew Rodriguez was a shrewd businessman who would drive a hard bargain. Around noon, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced Rodriguez's arrival. Hector wiped his hands on his jeans and walked out to meet the sleek black truck that pulled up beside the house. Emilio Rodriguez was a successful rancher from the next county, younger than Hector by at least a decade, with the confident air of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He stepped down from his truck and extended his hand. "Mendoza," he greeted. "Hot one today, isn't it?" "Always is," Hector replied, shaking his hand briefly. "Come to see Diablo, I take it." "Indeed. Heard you've had some trouble with him." Rodriguez's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thought I might take him off your hands." "Let's go take a look," Hector said, leading the way toward the corral. As they approached, Hector noticed with surprise that Luna was already there, sitting on the fence, just as she had the night before. Diablo was at the far end of the corral, watching her with that same wary interest. "Who's the girl?" Rodriguez asked, noticing the direction of Hector's gaze. "My ward," Hector replied, the word feeling strange on his tongue. "She's staying with me for a while." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow but made no comment as they reached the corral. Luna glanced at them briefly, then returned her attention to Diablo. "So this is the infamous Black Devil," Rodriguez said, studying the stallion. "Fine-looking animal, I'll give you that. But if no one can ride him..." "His bloodline alone is worth the price," Hector argued. Grandson of Midnight Commander on his sire's side. Rodriguez made a non-committal sound. "Let's see him move." Manuel, who had joined them, picked up a long stick and entered the corral cautiously. He waved the stick, and Diablo immediately responded, galloping around the perimeter with powerful strides, his black coat gleaming in the sunlight. "Good muscle tone," Rodriguez admitted. "Strong hindquarters." He turned to Hector. "I'll give you 5,000 for him." Hector's jaw tightened. "I paid 8 for him at auction." "That was before you discovered he can't be broken." Rodriguez shrugged. 5,000 is fair, considering the risk." As the men haggled, Luna remained perched on the fence, observing Diablo with quiet intensity. The stallion had returned to the far side of the corral, but his attention seemed divided between the men and the silent girl. Finally, Hector and Rodriguez shook hands. 6,000 then, Rodriguez said. "I'll send my men with a trailer tomorrow morning." As they walked back toward the house to finalize the paperwork, Hector glanced back at Luna. She hadn't moved from her spot, but something in her posture, a slight slump of the shoulders perhaps, suggested disappointment. He pushed the thought aside. Selling Diablo was the practical choice. The ranch couldn't afford any more failed projects or costly dreams. $6,000 wouldn't save them, but it would buy time. And right now, time was the most precious commodity Hector possessed. That evening, Rodriguez's check sat on Hector's desk, a promise of temporary reprieve from his financial woes. He should have felt relieved. Instead, a vague discomfort nagged at him, something he couldn't quite name. He'd made the practical decision, the only sensible choice given his circumstances. So why did it feel like surrender? He poured himself a small glass of whiskey, a rare indulgence, and stepped onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. From here, he could see the corral where Diablo continued his restless pacing. Tomorrow, the stallion would be gone. One less problem to worry about. A movement caught his eye. Luna was walking toward the corral, her slender figure silhouetted against the sunset. Hector frowned, setting down his glass. What was she doing out there alone? He'd warned her about the stallion's dangerous temperament. He hurried after her, but by the time he reached the corral, Luna was already perched on the fence rail, in what seemed to be her favorite spot. Diablo had noticed her arrival and stood watching from the center of the enclosure, his ears pricked forward. "Luna," Hector called, keeping his voice low so as not to startle the horse. "Come away from there. It's getting dark." She turned briefly, acknowledging his presence but made no move to leave. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled something out. Hector tensed, thinking it might be food. Offering treats to an unpredictable stallion was asking for trouble. But it wasn't food. It appeared to be a small, smooth stone. Luna held it in her palm, then set it on the fence post beside her. She didn't attempt to lure Diablo closer or make any sudden movements. She simply sat there, quiet and still, as she had the night before. Hector approached cautiously, staying a respectful distance from both girl and horse. "Luna, I sold him today. Rodriguez is coming for him tomorrow." She nodded without looking at him, her eyes fixed on Diablo. There was something in her expression, not quite sadness, but a quiet intensity that gave Hector pause. "He's dangerous," Hector continued, feeling strangely compelled to justify his decision. "No one can get near him without risking injury. The ranch can't afford to keep a horse we can't use or breed safely." Luna finally turned to him. She reached for her ever-present notebook and wrote, "He's scared." Hector read her words with surprise. "Scared? That monster. Luna, he's nearly killed 2 men." She wrote again, her pencil moving quickly across the page. "Not monster. Scared. Hurt before. Doesn't trust." Hector frowned. "How would you know that?" Luna tapped her chest, right over her heart, then pointed to her eyes. The gesture was clear enough. She felt it. She saw it. Hector sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, I understand you might feel some connection to him, but Diablo has been assessed by professional trainers. They all say the same thing. He's unbreakable. Some horses are just born wild, and he's one of them." Luna shook her head firmly, then wrote, "Not born wild. Made wild. Different." "Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything," Hector said, his voice gentle but firm. "Rodriguez is coming tomorrow. The deal is done." Luna's shoulders slumped slightly, but she nodded in acceptance. She slipped down from the fence and walked past Hector, heading back toward the house. Before she left, she reached for the small stone she'd placed on the fence post and returned it to her pocket. Hector remained at the corral, watching as Diablo resumed his pacing. "Scared, huh?" he murmured skeptically. The stallion snorted, tossing his magnificent head as if in defiance. Later that night, Hector found himself unable to sleep again. He got up to get a glass of water and noticed a light still on in Luna's room. Concerned, he knocked softly on her door. There was no response, of course, but after a moment, the door opened. Luna stood there in an oversized t-shirt and sweatpants, her long hair loose around her shoulders. She looked impossibly young and vulnerable. "Everything okay?" Hector asked awkwardly. "It's late." Luna nodded, then gestured for him to wait. She disappeared back into the room and returned with her notebook. She'd written a single question. "Tell me about my mother." The request caught Hector off guard. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. Carmen Vega had been locked away in the deepest chambers of his heart for so many years. "It's late," he repeated. "Maybe another time." Luna's expression fell, but she nodded in resignation. As she began to close the door, Hector found himself speaking. "She loved to dance." Luna paused, looking up at him with sudden interest. "Your mother," Hector continued, surprising himself. "She could dance like nobody's business. Even when there wasn't any music playing, she'd be swaying or tapping her foot, like she heard rhythms no one else could hear." A small smile touched Luna's lips. She wrote quickly, "She danced at home too." Hector felt something loosen in his chest. "We met at a local festival. I couldn't dance to save my life, but she pulled me into it anyway. Said everyone could dance if they stopped thinking so hard about it." He smiled at the memory. "She was right about a lot of things, your mother." Luna's eyes shone with quiet eagerness. She wrote, "What else?" Hector leaned against the doorframe, suddenly aware of how hungry this girl must be for stories of her mother. How little she might know of Carmen's life before she was born. She loved thunderstorms, he said. Most people would run inside, but Carmen would stand out in the rain, face turned up to the sky. Said it made her feel alive. He paused, lost in recollection. And she was stubborn. Lord, was she stubborn? Once she set her mind on something, wild horses couldn't drag her away from it. Luna wrote, "Like me with Diablo?" The comparison startled a laugh from Hector. Maybe so. You do have that same look in your eye sometimes. His smile faded. Carmen and I, we were young, had big plans, but life took us in different directions. Luna tilted her head questioningly. That's a story for another night, Hector said firmly. It's late, and tomorrow will be a busy day. She accepted this with a nod, but before closing her door, she wrote one more note. Thank you. You're welcome, Hector replied softly. Good night, Luna. He returned to his own room, knowing sleep would be even more elusive now. Memories of Carmen swirled through his mind, her laugh, her fierce determination, the way she'd looked at him as if he could accomplish anything. He'd been a different man then, full of dreams and ambitions. Before the failures, before the drought, before he'd lost Isabella and found himself alone with a ranch that was slowly dying beneath his hands. Morning arrived with the harsh blare of Rodriguez's truck horn. Hector, who had finally fallen asleep just before dawn, jolted awake. He dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, surprised again to find Luna already there, sipping coffee and reading. Rodriguez is here early, he said unnecessarily. His men will load up Diablo. Probably best if you stay inside until they're gone. Luna's face was unreadable, but she nodded in compliance. Satisfied, Hector went out to meet Rodriguez. The rancher had brought a sturdy horse trailer and 3 experienced hands to help with loading the stallion. Morning, Mendoza, Rodriguez called. Thought we'd get an early start. That beast of yours is going to need some serious work. He's all yours now, Hector replied, handing over the signed bill of sale in exchange for Rodriguez's check. Manuel will help your men. They walked to the corral together, where Manuel was already preparing for the difficult task ahead. Diablo seemed to sense something was happening. He was especially agitated, galloping around the perimeter of his enclosure and snorting loudly. Quite the firecracker, Rodriguez observed. But nothing my trainers can't handle. We've broken tougher horses before. Hector didn't respond. He watched as Rodriguez's men entered the corral, carrying ropes and a long pole with a loop at the end, tools for catching and restraining an uncooperative horse. Diablo's eyes rolled, showing whites as he evaded their initial attempts to corner him. Careful with him, Hector found himself saying. He's quick to kick. Rodriguez chuckled. Don't worry about my men. They know what they're doing. The loading process was every bit as difficult as Hector had anticipated. Diablo fought furiously, rearing and striking out with his hooves whenever the men got close. It took all 3 of Rodriguez's hands plus Manuel to finally get a rope around his neck and another on his hind leg, effectively limiting his movement. Even then, Diablo resisted, his powerful body straining against the ropes as they attempted to lead him toward the trailer. Sweat darkened his coat and foam flecked around his mouth. His eyes were wild with fear or rage, or both. He's going to hurt himself, Hector muttered, watching the stallion's desperate struggle. He'll settle once he's loaded, Rodriguez assured him. Just needs to learn who's boss. One of the men approached with a black hood, sometimes used to calm particularly difficult horses by limiting their vision. As they prepared to place it over Diablo's head, Hector noticed a movement from the corner of his eye. Luna was standing at the edge of the corral, her face pale, her hands gripping the fence rails so tightly her knuckles had turned white. How long she'd been there, Hector couldn't say, but the distress in her expression was unmistakable. Their eyes met across the distance. In that moment, Hector felt something shift inside him, a certainty he couldn't explain, a decision forming before he fully understood it. Stop, he called out suddenly. Wait. Rodriguez turned to him with a frown. What's the problem, Mendoza? Hector took a deep breath. I've changed my mind. The horse isn't for sale. Rodriguez stared at Hector as if he'd lost his mind. What do you mean, not for sale? We have a contract. He pulled the signed bill of sale from his pocket, waving it in Hector's face. This is legally binding, Mendoza. Hector's heart hammered in his chest. He hadn't planned this. The words had escaped him before he could think them through. But seeing Luna's face, remembering her quiet insistence that Diablo was merely frightened, not vicious, something had compelled him to speak. I'll return your check, Hector said firmly. Contract or not, I've changed my mind. You can't do that. Rodriguez's voice hardened. My men have already spent time and energy trying to load this animal. I'm not leaving without him. The men holding Diablo looked between their boss and Hector uncertainly, still struggling to control the stallion who continued to fight against the ropes. You'll have to, Hector replied, a sudden calmness settling over him despite the tension of the moment. This is my ranch, and that's my horse. I want your men to release him and leave. Rodriguez's face reddened. You're making a mistake, Mendoza. A big one. That check I gave you. It's more than fair for an unbroken stallion. You won't get a better offer. Maybe not, Hector conceded. But my decision is final. For a moment it seemed Rodriguez might argue further. But something in Hector's stance, perhaps the quiet determination that had replaced his earlier uncertainty, gave the younger rancher pause. Fine, Rodriguez said at last, holding out his hand. Give me back my check, and we'll call it a day. But don't come crying to me when that devil horse kills someone. Hector went to the house to retrieve the check, aware of Luna's eyes following him. When he returned, Rodriguez snatched the check from his hand and signaled to his men. Let him go, he ordered curtly. The men looked reluctant to release Diablo after having worked so hard to restrain him, but they obeyed, carefully loosening the ropes and backing away. The stallion, suddenly freed, bolted to the far side of the corral, where he stood with his head high, sides heaving. You're a fool, Mendoza, Rodriguez said as he climbed into his truck. This ranch is dying, and we both know it. That horse was your lifeline. Hector didn't respond, watching silently as Rodriguez and his men drove away in a cloud of dust. Only when they had disappeared down the road did he turn to Luna, who still stood at the fence, her face a mixture of confusion and relief. I don't know why I did that, Hector admitted quietly. Luna reached for her notebook and wrote, Because he needs more time. Time for what? Hector asked. No amount of time is going to change that horse's nature. She shook her head vigorously and wrote, Not his nature, his trust. He needs to learn to trust again. Manuel approached, looking bewildered. Boss, what just happened? Why did you cancel the sale? Hector sighed, still not entirely sure himself. I changed my mind, he said simply. We're keeping Diablo. But the money. Manuel trailed off, clearly thinking of the ranch's precarious financial situation. We'll figure something out, Hector said with more confidence than he felt. For now, leave the stallion be. Give him some water and space. As Manuel moved to comply, albeit with a doubtful expression, Hector turned back to Luna. You really believe he can change? That he's not just naturally wild? Luna nodded firmly, then wrote, Let me try with him. Hector's eyebrows shot up. Absolutely not. I may have kept him, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let a 17-year-old girl get herself killed trying to tame him. Luna's expression grew stubborn, a look Hector was beginning to recognize. She wrote again, I won't get hurt. I know what I'm doing. How could you possibly know what you're doing? Hector asked, exasperated. Have you ever trained horses before? Luna hesitated, then nodded slowly. Your mother let you work with horses? Hector asked, surprised. The Carmen he remembered had been a city girl, more comfortable in dance halls than stables. Luna wrote, After Mom got sick, neighbor had therapy horses. I helped. Therapy horses are gentle, trained animals, Hector pointed out. Diablo is nothing like that. Luna's next note was simple but firm. Please trust me. Hector looked from the determined girl to the wild stallion, still pacing nervously at the far end of the corral. This was madness. He'd just turned down $6,000, money the ranch desperately needed, on some inexplicable impulse. And now Luna wanted permission to work with a horse that professional trainers had deemed too dangerous to handle. Yet something in her quiet confidence gave him pause. There was wisdom in her eyes that seemed beyond her years, a certainty that couldn't be dismissed as mere teenage stubbornness. "You can observe him," Hector compromised finally. "From outside the corral only. No going inside, no direct contact. Just observation. And only when I or Manuel are nearby." "Understood." Luna's face lit up with such sudden joy that Hector was momentarily taken aback. It was the most emotion he'd seen from her since her arrival. She nodded eagerly and wrote, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Hector muttered. "I still think it's a waste of time." But Luna was already hurrying back to the house, her steps lighter than before. Hector watched her go, wondering what he'd just set in motion. The rest of the day passed in a haze of routine ranch work. Hector tried not to think about the check he'd returned to Rodriguez or what it might mean for the ranch's future. Instead, he focused on repairing a section of roof on one of the outbuildings, a task that required enough concentration to keep his troubled thoughts at bay. As evening approached, he found Luna exactly where he expected, sitting on the fence rail by Diablo's corral. This time, however, she'd brought a book with her. She appeared to be reading aloud, though from a distance Hector couldn't hear her voice or make out the words. Curious, he approached quietly. As he drew closer, he realized with astonishment that Luna was indeed speaking, her lips moving in what must have been the first words she'd uttered since arriving at the ranch. Her voice was so soft that even standing only a few yards away, he could barely make it out. A gentle murmur, like the sound of a distant stream. She was reading from what appeared to be a well-worn collection of poetry. Diablo stood about 20 feet away, not approaching but not retreating either, his ears pricked forward as if listening. Hector remained still, not wanting to interrupt this unexpected development. The scene before him was so strange, so unexpectedly peaceful. The wild stallion and the silent girl, connected by the barely audible thread of her voice. After a few minutes, Luna seemed to sense his presence. She closed the book and turned to look at him, her expression suddenly guarded again. "You were reading to him," Hector said, trying to keep the surprise from his voice. Luna nodded, slipping down from the fence. "And you can speak," he added carefully. She looked away, something like shame crossing her features. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Sometimes. Only when it feels safe. Usually can't." Hector nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "And you feel safe with him? With Diablo?" Luna thought for a moment, then wrote, "He doesn't expect anything from me." The simple honesty of her answer struck Hector deeply. Of course, the horse didn't care if Luna spoke or remained silent. He had no expectations, no preconceived notions of how she should behave or who she should be. In that sense, perhaps Diablo offered a kind of freedom that humans rarely provided. "What were you reading?" he asked, gesturing to the book. Luna showed him the cover. "Selected Poems of Federico Garcia Lorca." "Poetry for a Wild Horse," Hector said with a slight smile. "Novel approach to training." Luna shook her head and wrote, "Not training yet. Just getting him used to my voice, my presence." "And is it working?" She pointed to Diablo, who remained in the same spot, watching them with alert interest rather than his usual aggressive wariness. He stayed, didn't run to the other side. Progress. Hector had to admit, the stallion did seem calmer than usual. "Well, keep reading if you want. But remember our agreement, no going inside the corral." Luna nodded solemnly, then wrote, "Thank you for keeping him." Hector sighed, the full weight of his impulsive decision settling on his shoulders once more. "We'll see if it was the right call. Right now I'm not so sure." But as he walked away, leaving Luna to resume her quiet reading, he couldn't help but glance back at the unlikely pair. The silent girl finding her voice, and the wild horse learning to listen. That night, as Hector sat at his desk reviewing the ranch's accounts, the numbers seemed even more daunting than before. Without Rodriguez's money, he would struggle to make the next mortgage payment. And if he missed that payment, the bank would be one step closer to foreclosure. He closed the ledger with a heavy sigh. What had possessed him to turn down that sale? It wasn't just Luna's distress. There had been something else, some deeper impulse he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the sight of Diablo fighting so desperately against captivity, against the men who sought to control him. Or perhaps it was simply that Hector was tired of surrendering, tired of watching pieces of his life and dreams slip away one by one. Whatever the reason, what was done was done. Now he needed to find another way to keep the ranch afloat. He pulled out a calendar and began marking potential cattle sales, calculating what he might earn if he sold off more of his herd. The numbers were grim, but not entirely hopeless. If he cut expenses to the bone and sold 10 more head than he'd planned, he might just make it another month. As he worked, his thoughts kept returning to Luna and the gentle murmur of her voice as she read to Diablo. It was such a small thing. A quiet girl reading poetry to an untamable horse, and yet, somehow, it felt like the beginning of something significant. Over the next week, a routine began to establish itself at Piedra Seca Ranch. Each morning, Luna would rise early to study at the kitchen table. After breakfast, she would help with small chores around the house, washing dishes, sweeping the porch, even learning to make simple meals under Hector's somewhat clumsy guidance. In the afternoons, she would sit at Diablo's corral, reading poetry, or simply watching the stallion as he gradually grew accustomed to her presence. Hector observed these developments with cautious interest. Though Luna remained largely silent around him and the ranch hands, he occasionally caught the soft murmur of her voice when she thought she was alone with Diablo. It was like witnessing a flower slowly unfurling its petals, a careful, fragile process that couldn't be rushed. As for Diablo, even Hector had to admit there was a subtle change in the stallion's behavior. He still paced and snorted when Manuel or the other workers approached. But when Luna sat on the fence with her book, he would eventually settle, sometimes grazing or resting within 20 feet of her, a distance that would have been unthinkable before. "It's the darndest thing," Manuel commented one afternoon as they watched from a distance. "That horse actually seems to be listening when she reads." "Poetry," Hector said with a shake of his head. "Of all things. Whatever works, I suppose." Manuel hesitated, then added carefully, "Rodriguez came by the feed store yesterday. Said some choice words about you." Hector grimaced. "I imagine he did. He also mentioned that if you change your mind about Diablo, his offer still stands. 5,000 now, not 6. "Of course," Hector muttered. Rodriguez was nothing if not opportunistic. He knew the ranch's financial situation was precarious. "Well, he can keep waiting. The horse isn't for sale." Manuel nodded, though his expression suggested he had doubts about the wisdom of this stance. "Whatever you say, boss." As the second week of Luna's stay began, Hector noticed she was spending more time in Isabella's old sewing room. The door, which had usually remained ajar, was now often closed. Occasionally, he would hear the sounds of fabric rustling or scissors cutting, but Luna would emerge only for meals and her daily sessions with Diablo. Curious but reluctant to pry, Hector said nothing about these new activities. Luna was entitled to her privacy, and if she had found some project to occupy her time, all the better. One evening, as Hector sat on the porch watching the sunset, Luna appeared beside him. She held out her notebook, which contained a new message. "Can I try something with Diablo tomorrow?" "What kind of something?" Hector asked, immediately wary. She wrote, "Next step, need to go in corral." Hector shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. We agreed, observation only from outside the fence." Luna's expression grew determined. She wrote again, "Has been 2 weeks. He's ready. I'm ready." "Luna, that horse has injured professional trainers with decades of experience. What makes you think he won't hurt you?" She considered his question seriously, then wrote, "He knows I won't hurt him. We've built trust." Reading poetry from a safe distance isn't the same as being in the corral with him, Hector argued. He could kill you with one kick, regardless of how many poems you've read to him. Luna's eyes flashed with frustration. She wrote quickly, "You don't understand. He's different now. Please trust me." Hector sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his hair. "Luna, I'm responsible for your safety. Your mother entrusted you to me. If anything happened to you," she interrupted by writing, "my mother would understand. She believed in following your heart." The mention of Carmen gave Hector pause. It was true. Carmen had always followed her instincts, often against conventional wisdom. It was one of the qualities he had admired most about her, even when her choices had led her away from him. "Let me think about it," he conceded finally. "No promises." Luna nodded, accepting this compromise for now. She turned to go back inside but hesitated at the door. After a moment, she wrote one more note. "I made something for Diablo. We'll show you tomorrow." Hector's curiosity was piqued, but Luna disappeared into the house before he could ask for details. He remained on the porch long after dark, weighing the risks against Luna's quiet determination. The ranch needed a miracle. Could this silent girl and untamable horse somehow provide it? The rational part of his mind scoffed at the notion, but something deeper, something he couldn't quite name, held out hope. The next morning, Hector found Luna waiting for him after breakfast, holding a cloth bundle in her arms. Her expression was a mixture of nervousness and pride as she offered it to him. Unfolding the fabric, Hector discovered a handmade halter, crafted from soft, supple leather that had been carefully cut and stitched together. He recognized the material. It had come from Isabella's collection of leather scraps, left over from various projects. The workmanship was impressive, especially for someone so young. "You made this?" Hector asked, genuinely surprised. Luna nodded, then wrote, "For Diablo. Regular halter's too harsh. This is softer, more comfortable." Hector examined the halter more closely. The edges had been smoothed and rounded, with extra padding where it would rest against the horse's sensitive nose and poll. It was thoughtfully designed to be both gentle and secure. "You've done this before," he observed. "Made tack, I mean." Luna nodded again, writing, "The therapy stables. They taught me. Special equipment for sensitive horses." Hector handed the halter back to her, his resistance weakening in the face of such obvious care and preparation. "You really believe you can get close enough to put this on him?" She wrote with confidence, "Yes, if you let me try." After a long moment of internal debate, Hector nodded reluctantly. "All right, but with conditions. Manuel and I will be present the entire time. You'll carry a small shield. We have an old garbage can lid that will work. And at the first sign of aggression from Diablo, you come out immediately. No arguments." Luna's face lit up, and she nodded eagerly, accepting his terms without hesitation. "We'll try this afternoon," Hector decided. "That will give me time to brief Manuel and prepare." The hours until then passed with excruciating slowness for Luna, who could barely focus on her studies. Hector, meanwhile, found himself growing increasingly anxious as the appointed time approached. What if he was making a terrible mistake? What if Luna was overestimating her abilities or underestimating Diablo's unpredictability? By 3 o'clock, the preparations were complete. Manuel had been informed of the plan, though he looked dubious about the whole endeavor. The old garbage can lid had been located and cleaned, ready to serve as an improvised shield. And Luna, carrying her handmade halter, stood at the corral gate with a determined expression. "Remember," Hector said sternly, "at the first sign of trouble, you get out. No heroics. Your safety comes first." Luna nodded solemnly, took a deep breath, and entered the corral. Diablo, who had been grazing at the far end, immediately raised his head. His ears pricked forward, and he stood perfectly still, watching as Luna slowly closed the gate behind her. Hector and Manuel waited tensely outside, ready to intervene if necessary. Hector had a lasso ready, though he knew it would take precious seconds to deploy if Diablo charged. But the stallion didn't charge. He remained motionless, his dark eyes fixed on Luna as she took a few careful steps into the corral. She moved with deliberate slowness, keeping the garbage can lid at her side, but not raising it in a way that might appear threatening. About 15 feet into the corral, Luna stopped. She set the shield down at her feet, within easy reach but no longer in her hands. Then, to Hector's amazement, she began to speak. Her voice was soft, barely audible where he stood, but it carried a gentle rhythm. She was reciting poetry again, the same soothing cadence she'd used during their previous sessions. Diablo's ears twitched, catching the familiar sound. He shifted his weight, but didn't retreat. Instead, after a long, tense moment, he took a single step forward. Luna remained still, continuing her quiet recitation. The stallion took another cautious step, then another. Hector held his breath, the lasso clutched tightly in his hands, as Diablo gradually closed the distance between himself and Luna. When the stallion was about 10 feet away, he stopped again, snorting softly. Luna slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, the smooth stone Hector had seen her place on the fence post during one of her earlier sessions. She held it in her open palm, not extending her hand toward Diablo but simply letting him see it. Then, with movements so slow they were almost imperceptible, she set the stone on the ground before her. Diablo lowered his head slightly, his nostrils flaring as he seemed to consider this curious offering. The standoff continued for what felt like an eternity. The girl standing perfectly still, the stallion regarding her with wary interest, the stone resting on the ground between them like some strange bridge. Then, with a grace that belied his size, Diablo took the final steps forward. He stretched his neck, his velvety nose hovering just above the stone. Luna remained motionless, her quiet voice never faltering as the stallion's breath stirred her hair. Hector watched in stunned disbelief as Diablo gently nuzzled the stone, then raised his head to regard Luna face to face. There was no fear in her expression, no tension in her posture, only a serene acceptance, as if this moment had been inevitable from the start. And Diablo, the untamable black devil who had fought so fiercely against every human attempt to control him, lowered his proud head and allowed Luna to gently stroke his forehead. Manuel let out a low whistle of astonishment. "Madre de Dios," he murmured. "I've never seen anything like it." Hector could only nod, speechless as he watched Luna gently stroke Diablo's forehead. The stallion's eyes had softened, his aggressive stance melting away beneath her touch. It seemed impossible. This fierce creature that had fought so violently against capture now standing docile before a slip of a girl. "Should we help her get the halter on?" Manuel whispered, still gripping the fence tightly. "No," Hector replied quietly. "Let her work. I think she knows what she's doing." Luna continued her gentle stroking, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't reach for the halter yet, seeming to understand that this first contact was precious and fragile. For several minutes she simply stood with Diablo, occasionally running her hand down his neck or along his shoulder, allowing him to become accustomed to her touch. Then, with the same unhurried patience, she knelt to retrieve the stone from the ground. Diablo watched her curiously but didn't startle. When she stood again, she held out her palm with the stone resting on it. The stallion lowered his head, sniffing at the offering before carefully taking it with his lips and dropping it again. Luna smiled, a real, unguarded smile that transformed her solemn face. She reached down for the handmade halter that hung from her belt. Holding it where Diablo could see and smell it, she let him investigate the unfamiliar object. The stallion's nostrils flared as he caught the scent of the leather, but he showed no signs of fear. With exquisite care, Luna began to raise the halter toward Diablo's head. This was the critical moment. Many horses, even relatively tame ones, resisted the confinement of a halter. Hector tensed, ready to call out if Diablo showed any sign of aggression. But the stallion remained still, his eyes fixed on Luna's face as she gently slipped the halter over his nose. Her movements were fluid and confident, never hesitating or showing uncertainty that might trigger his flight response. When the halter was properly positioned, she fastened the buckle with a practiced touch. "She's done it," Manuel breathed. "The devil horse is actually wearing a halter." Hector couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Luna now stood beside Diablo, one hand resting lightly on his neck, the other holding the lead rope attached to the halter. The stallion that professional trainers had deemed unbreakable was allowing himself to be handled by a 17-year-old girl who barely spoke. After a few more minutes of quiet communion, Luna began to lead Diablo in a small circle. The stallion followed her willingly, his steps measured and calm. When they completed the circle, Luna guided him toward the gate where Hector and Manuel waited. "Open it," Hector instructed softly. "Let's see if she can bring him out." Manuel carefully unlatched the gate, swinging it wide. Luna led Diablo forward without hesitation. The stallion's ears flickered nervously as he approached the opening, but he continued to follow her, step by careful step, until they both stood outside the corral. "Well, I'll be damned," Manuel muttered, shaking his head in wonderment. Luna's face glowed with quiet triumph as she looked to Hector for approval. He found himself smiling back, his earlier doubts and fears replaced by astonishment and a strange, unexpected pride. "Good work," he said simply. "Very good work." Luna nodded, her eyes shining. She led Diablo in a few more circles in the open area outside the corral, then guided him back inside. With the same gentle care she had used to put the halter on, she now removed it, stepping back to allow the stallion his freedom. Diablo remained where he was for a moment, as if confused by this release. Then he trotted to the center of the corral, shook his magnificent head, and turned to watch as Luna exited and closed the gate behind her. "How did you do that?" Hector asked when she rejoined them. "What was that stone?" Luna reached for her notebook and wrote, "River stone from my mother, smooth and cool. Gives him something to focus on besides fear. And the poetry? Rhythm calms him, gives him time to think, not just react." Hector shook his head in amazement. "In 3 weeks you've done what professional trainers couldn't accomplish in months." Luna wrote, "They tried to break him. I'm trying to understand him." The simple wisdom of her words struck Hector deeply. How many times in his life had he tried to force situations rather than understand them? How often had he met resistance with greater force rather than patience? "What's next?" he asked, genuinely curious about her approach. "More of the same for a few days. Building trust, then maybe short rides." Manuel, who had been listening silently, let out a low laugh. "Riding him? That beast? No offense, but I think you're getting ahead of yourself." Luna didn't seem offended. She simply wrote, "We'll see." Over the next several days, Luna repeated the process, entering the corral, allowing Diablo to approach her, putting on the halter, and leading him in increasingly complex patterns. Each session lasted a little longer, with Diablo growing more comfortable and responsive to her guidance. Hector made a point of observing these sessions whenever his ranch duties allowed. There was something mesmerizing about watching the silent girl and the once wild stallion moving together in perfect harmony. Sometimes, when Luna didn't realize he was nearby, he would catch fragments of her voice, still quiet, but growing slightly stronger each day as she read her poetry or simply talked to Diablo in low, soothing tones. One evening, about a week after that first breakthrough, Hector was surprised to hear a knock at his office door. Luna stood there, holding her notebook. "Come in," he said, setting aside the bills he'd been reviewing. "Everything okay?" She nodded and handed him a note. "Diablo is ready for saddle training. Need your help." Hector raised his eyebrows. "My help? I thought Manuel was assisting you." Luna wrote, "Need you specifically. Diablo respects you." "Respects me?" Hector couldn't help but laugh. "That horse tried to kick my head off the first week we had him." Luna's expression remained serious as she wrote, "He was afraid then, different now. You're the ranch owner, the leader. Important that you're part of this." Hector considered her words. There was some truth to what she was saying. Horses were herd animals that responded to clear hierarchies. If Diablo was to become a true ranch horse, he would need to respect not just Luna, but Hector as well. "All right," he agreed reluctantly. "What do you need me to do?" The next morning found them at the corral earlier than usual. Luna had brought not only the handmade halter but also a small, lightweight saddle blanket she had fashioned from soft fabric. "No saddle yet?" Hector asked, noting its absence. Luna shook her head and wrote, "One step at a time, blanket first, saddle in a few days if all goes well." As before, Luna entered the corral alone and went through the now familiar routine of allowing Diablo to approach her. The stallion came more quickly now, recognizing and apparently welcoming her presence. After putting on the halter, she led him around for a few minutes, then signaled for Hector to enter. Hector approached slowly, following Luna's earlier example of calm, deliberate movements. Diablo watched him warily, nostrils flaring, but didn't pull away or show signs of aggression. Luna handed Hector the lead rope, then wrote quickly, "Hold steady, let him smell you, don't look directly in his eyes." Hector did as instructed, keeping his gaze slightly averted as Diablo stretched his neck to sniff at him. The stallion's breath was warm against his hand, his dark eyes still cautious, but no longer filled with the blind panic Hector had seen before. After a few moments, Luna gestured for Hector to hand the rope back. She then showed him the blanket, indicating that he should take one end while she held the other. Together, they approached Diablo's side. With infinite patience, Luna began to raise the blanket toward Diablo's back. The stallion tensed slightly, but remained still as she gently placed it on him. Hector followed her lead, helping to smooth the blanket into place. "Now what?" he whispered, aware of how close they were standing to an animal that had once seemed untamable. Luna made a circular motion with her finger. They would walk Diablo with the blanket on, helping him grow accustomed to the feeling of something on his back. For nearly an hour they worked together in this way, Luna leading, Hector following her silent instructions, and Diablo gradually accepting this new development with remarkable patience. By the end of the session, the stallion was walking calmly with the blanket in place, no longer startling when it shifted slightly with his movement. As they removed the blanket and halter, preparing to release Diablo back into the corral, Hector found himself filled with an unfamiliar sense of accomplishment. It wasn't like fixing a fence or negotiating a cattle sale. Those were tasks he understood, had done countless times before. This was something entirely new, a kind of communication he hadn't known was possible. "You're a good teacher," he told Luna as they exited the corral. She ducked her head, seemingly embarrassed by the praise, but a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. She wrote, "Good student too, both of you." Looking back at Diablo, who was now trotting around the corral with his head held high, Hector had to admit there was truth in her words. They were all learning from each other, forming connections he wouldn't have thought possible just a few weeks ago. As they walked back to the house, a thought struck him, one that brought both hope and anxiety. If Luna could continue this progress with Diablo, if she could truly transform this wild stallion into a trained horse, what might that mean for the ranch? For his own future? For hers? News traveled fast in small communities. Within days, word had spread about the silent girl who was somehow taming Piedra Seca Ranch's infamous black stallion. Occasionally, trucks would slow as they passed the property, drivers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of this unlikely pair. Once, an old rancher from 2 properties over even stopped by, claiming he needed to borrow some fencing tools, though his real purpose was clearly to verify the rumors he'd heard. Hector found himself fielding questions whenever he went into town for supplies. "That girl really got a halter on the devil horse? Heard she's got some kind of magic touch with animals. They're saying she doesn't speak a word to anyone but can talk to that stallion." He deflected most inquiries with non-committal responses, feeling strangely protective of both Luna and her accomplishments. What was happening between the girl and Diablo felt private somehow, almost sacred. It wasn't meant to be town gossip or a roadside attraction. Meanwhile, the training continued to progress. After 3 days of working with the blanket, Luna decided it was time to introduce a saddle. She wrote detailed instructions for Hector, explaining exactly how they would approach this critical step. "Remember," she wrote as they stood outside the corral that morning, "if he panics, we stop immediately. Better to go slow than scare him." Hector nodded, holding the lightweight Western saddle they'd selected, an old one of Isabella's, smaller and less imposing than the heavier work saddles he used. Luna had spent the previous evening conditioning it with leather oil, making it supple and removing any stiffness that might startle Diablo. Their routine began as it always did, Luna entering first, allowing Diablo to approach her, then putting on the halter and leading him in a few circles to establish a calm connection. When she signaled, Hector entered with the saddle, moving slowly and deliberately. Diablo eyed the saddle suspiciously, his ears flicking back and forth. He shifted his weight nervously as Hector approached, but Luna stroked his neck and spoke to him in that quiet voice that seemed reserved only for the stallion. Following Luna's earlier instructions, Hector first allowed Diablo to investigate the saddle, letting him smell it and even touch it with his nose. Then, with infinite patience, they began the process of placing it on his back, first just resting it there without cinching it, letting him grow accustomed to the weight and feel. Diablo tensed when the saddle first settled on his back, but he didn't bolt or buck as Hector had half expected. Instead, he stood quivering slightly, looking to Luna as if for reassurance. She continued her gentle stroking and murmured words, and gradually, the stallion relaxed. Over the next hour, they repeated the process several times, placing the saddle, removing it, walking Diablo around, then trying again. By the end of the session, they had even managed to loosely fasten the cinch, though Luna indicated they wouldn't tighten it fully until Diablo was completely comfortable with this new development. "He did well," Hector said as they put away the equipment. "Better than I expected." Luna nodded, her face glowing with quiet pride. She wrote, "Tomorrow we'll tighten the cinch properly. Maybe by next week someone can sit on him." "Someone?" Hector raised an eyebrow. "You mean you, I assume?" She nodded again, then hesitated before writing, "Unless you want to be first?" Hector laughed, genuinely amused by the suggestion. "I think I'll leave that honor to you. You've earned it." Over the next several days, Diablo continued to accept the saddle with increasing ease. Luna worked with him for hours, gradually tightening the cinch, teaching him to respond to gentle pressure on the lead rope, helping him understand what was being asked of him without fear or confusion. One evening, as Hector sat on the porch watching the sunset, Miguel's truck appeared on the dusty road. He hadn't seen his brother since the day he'd brought Luna to the ranch, now over a month ago. "Looks like your uncle is here," Hector called through the screen door to Luna, who was preparing dinner in the kitchen, another skill she'd been quietly developing. She appeared in the doorway, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. Hector understood her apprehension. Miguel was essentially a stranger to her, someone who had merely transported her to her new home without establishing any real connection. "It'll be fine," Hector assured her. "He's probably just checking in." Miguel parked beside the house and climbed out, looking tired but pleased to see them. "Hector, and Luna, how are you both?" Hector greeted his brother with a brief embrace. "We're getting by. What brings you out this way?" "Promised I'd check on Luna, didn't I?" Miguel smiled at the girl, who nodded politely, but remained in the doorway, her expression guarded. "And I've been hearing some interesting stories in town. Something about a wild stallion being tamed." "News travels," Hector said with a shrug. "Come inside. Luna's making dinner. Enchiladas, I think." She nodded, retreating to the kitchen to continue her preparations. Once inside, Miguel lowered his voice. "Seriously, though, is it true? The girl's working with that black devil you bought? The one that nearly killed Rodriguez's trainer?" "It's true," Hector confirmed. "She's got away with him. Never seen anything like it." "And she's still not talking?" "Not to us. Sometimes to the horse, but very quietly. She communicates fine, though, writes everything down." Miguel shook his head in amazement. Carmen never mentioned her daughter had such a gift with horses. I don't think Carmen knew, Hector replied. Luna said she only started working with horses after her mother got sick. The mention of Carmen cast a brief shadow over the conversation. Miguel hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. Actually, there's another reason I came. I found this while clearing out the last of Carmen's things. He handed Hector a faded photograph. It showed a much younger version of himself and Carmen, arms around each other, laughing at some forgotten joke. In the background was a festival, the same one where they had first met, judging by their age. Thought you might want it, Miguel said quietly. Or maybe Luna would. Hector stared at the photograph, feeling a complex mix of emotions rise within him. Carmen looked so vibrant, so full of life, the way he remembered her best. Thank you, he said finally. I'll show it to Luna later. She's been asking about her mother, about us. Miguel nodded, understanding. How's the ranch doing? Last time we talked, things were pretty tight. Hector sighed, glancing toward the kitchen to make sure Luna wasn't within earshot. Still are. I turned down a decent offer for Diablo, which didn't help matters. But we're hanging on. Sold some cattle, cut expenses where I could. If you need help, we're managing, Hector interrupted firmly. One day at a time. Dinner was a relatively quiet affair, with Miguel doing most of the talking, updating them on news from the city, commenting on how delicious the enchiladas were, occasionally asking Luna gentle questions that she could answer with a nod or by writing brief responses. After the meal, as Luna cleared the dishes, Miguel pulled Hector aside. She seems to be settling in well, he observed. More comfortable than when I left her here. She's finding her place, Hector agreed. The work with Diablo has given her purpose and confidence. Good, good. Miguel hesitated. There's something else I should mention. I ran into Rodriguez in town last week. He asked a lot of questions about Luna and the horse. Seemed very interested. Hector frowned. What kind of questions? Wanted to know how she was doing it, how far along the training had come. Said he might stop by again soon to see for himself. I doubt his interest is just curiosity, Hector muttered. He still wants that horse. Probably, Miguel conceded. Just thought you should know. After Miguel departed, promising to visit again soon, Hector found Luna sitting on the porch steps, gazing up at the star-filled sky. He joined her, offering the photograph his brother had brought. Your uncle found this, he said softly. It's your mother and me, a long time ago. Luna took the photograph carefully, studying it with intense focus. Her fingers traced the outline of her mother's laughing face, then Hector's younger visage. She looked up at him questioningly. It was at the festival where we met, Hector explained, the harvest festival in San Miguel. She was so beautiful that night, dancing while everyone else just watched. I couldn't take my eyes off her. Luna reached for her notebook, but instead of writing, she hesitated. Then, in a voice so soft Hector had to lean closer to hear, she whispered, She loved dancing. Hector felt his heart skip a beat, not just at the rare sound of her voice, but at the simple truth of her words. Yes, he agreed gently. She certainly did. They sat in companionable silence for a while, both lost in thoughts of Carmen. Finally, Luna wrote a question. Why didn't you stay together? It was the question Hector had been both expecting and dreading. He sighed, looking out across the darkened ranch land. I wanted to stay here, build up the ranch my father had started. Your mother, she wanted to see the world, live in the city. We were young, stubborn. Neither of us was willing to compromise. Luna considered this, then wrote, Do you regret it? Sometimes, Hector admitted, when I see how things turned out. But we can't live in regrets, Luna. We can only move forward with what we have now. She nodded slowly, tucking the photograph carefully into her notebook. Then she wrote one more note before rising to go inside. Tomorrow Diablo will be ready for his first rider. Dawn broke clear and golden over Piedra Seca Ranch, the early light casting long shadows across the yard as Hector stepped onto the porch with his coffee. He'd barely slept, his mind filled with thoughts of Carmen, memories stirred by that old photograph, and anxiety about what Luna planned to attempt today. Riding Diablo. Even after all the progress they'd made, the idea still struck him as dangerous. The stallion had become remarkably compliant with Luna, accepting the saddle and bridle without resistance, responding to her gentle guidance. But sitting on a horse's back was different. It triggered instincts that went deeper than mere handling. Many seemingly tame horses revealed their wild hearts the moment a human's weight settled on them. He found Luna already in the kitchen, as usual. She looked up from her notebook where she appeared to be writing detailed instructions, her expression both determined and nervous. "Morning," Hector said, refilling his coffee. "Big day." Luna nodded, sliding her notebook toward him. She'd written a plan for the morning's session, including safety precautions and a request for Manuel to be present as well. "Three-person approach," Hector read aloud. "You'll handle Diablo's head, Manuel will hold a second lead rope for added control, and I'll spot while you mount." He looked up at her. "You've thought this through." She nodded again, adding another note. "Safer with team. First ride's always unpredictable." "Maybe we should wait a few more days," Hector suggested, still uneasy about the risk. "There's no rush." Luna shook her head firmly, writing, "He's ready. I'm ready. Best not to delay." There was no arguing with her quiet certainty. After breakfast, they gathered the necessary equipment: saddle, bridle, lead ropes, and the special halter Luna had made. Manuel arrived shortly after, having been informed of the plan the previous day. "Are you sure about this, boss?" he asked Hector privately as they walked to the corral. "That horse has been good with her on the ground, but riding is different." "I know," Hector replied, "but she seems confident, and honestly, I've never seen anything like what she's accomplished so far. If anyone can do this, it's Luna." Diablo was waiting at the fence when they approached, his head raised in what almost looked like anticipation. Luna entered the corral first, as always, carrying only her smooth riverstone and the halter. The stallion came to her immediately, lowering his head for her greeting touch. Hector and Manuel exchanged glances of amazement. It was still startling to see the transformation in the once wild horse, how he actively sought Luna's presence now, how he seemed to calm when she was near. Following their established routine, Luna haltered Diablo and led him in a few circles, then signaled for Hector to bring in the saddle. The stallion accepted it calmly, having grown accustomed to the weight and feel over the past week. Manuel entered last, moving slowly and keeping a respectful distance until Luna indicated he should approach. With practiced ease, they saddled Diablo, checking and double-checking that everything was secure but comfortable. Luna ran her hands over the stallion repeatedly, speaking to him in her soft voice, preparing him for what was to come. When everything was ready, she handed Diablo's lead rope to Hector and stepped back to remove her heavy boots. She'd explained earlier that her first ride would be barefoot. She wanted to be able to feel the horse beneath her more directly, to communicate with subtle pressure rather than hard heels. "Ready?" Hector asked, his voice betraying his nervousness. Luna nodded. She approached Diablo's left side, stroked his neck one more time, then placed her hands on the saddle. Manuel positioned himself on Diablo's right side, holding a second lead rope attached to the halter, ready to help control the stallion if necessary. With one fluid movement, Luna raised her foot to the stirrup and swung herself up onto Diablo's back. The stallion tensed immediately, his back hollowed, his head came up, and for one heart-stopping moment, Hector was certain he would explode into bucking. But Luna leaned forward, her hands gentle on his neck, her voice a constant soothing murmur. She didn't squeeze with her legs or pull on the reins, she simply sat there, letting him feel her weight, letting him understand that this new sensation wasn't a threat. Seconds stretched into a minute, then two. Gradually, Diablo's tense posture relaxed. His ears, which had been pinned back, swiveled forward again. His breathing, which had quickened in alarm, slowed to a normal rhythm. "I'll be damned," Manuel whispered. "She's actually riding him." It wasn't riding in the conventional sense. Luna wasn't directing Diablo to move, merely sitting on his back. But it was a monumental achievement nonetheless. The stallion that had been deemed untamable was accepting a rider without resistance. After a few more minutes of this quiet communion, Luna made a subtle movement with her body. Diablo responded immediately, taking a careful step forward. Another gentle shift, and he took another step. Soon they were walking slowly around the corral, Luna guiding the stallion with the slightest pressure of her legs and hands, barely using the reins at all. Hector watched in awe, still holding the lead rope, but no longer needing to provide any control. The connection between Luna and Diablo was palpable, a wordless conversation happening through touch and trust. They completed 3 full circuits of the corral before Luna indicated she wanted to stop. Carefully, with the same fluid grace she'd shown mounting, she slid off Diablo's back. The stallion remained calm, turning his head to nuzzle her shoulder as if asking why the session had ended. Luna's face was radiant, a smile breaking through her usual reserve. She stroked Diablo's forehead, then led him to where Hector and Manuel stood, both men still speechless with amazement. That was... Hector struggled to find words adequate to the moment. Luna, that was incredible. She ducked her head, but her smile remained. She reached for her notebook, which she'd left hanging on the fence, and wrote, "He trusted me, knew I wouldn't hurt him." "I've never seen anything like it," Manuel said, shaking his head in wonder. That horse moved like he was reading her mind. They were so absorbed in the triumph of the moment that none of them noticed the black truck pulling up to the ranch house, or the man who stepped out and stood watching from a distance, his expression calculating. It wasn't until they had removed Diablo's saddle and were leading him back to the corral gate that Hector spotted their visitor. "Rodriguez," he muttered, his joy instantly dampened. "What's he doing here?" Luna, sensing the change in his tone, looked toward the house. Her posture stiffened when she saw the rancher approaching, his boots kicking up dust as he strode toward the corral. "Mendoza," Rodriguez called, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Thought I'd stop by to see how that devil horse of yours is doing." His gaze shifted to Luna, then to Diablo, who was still standing calmly beside her. "And it seems the rumors are true. The girl has worked a miracle." "Just good training," Hector replied curtly. "What can I do for you, Rodriguez?" "I was in the neighborhood." Rodriguez leaned against the fence, studying Diablo with obvious interest. "Quite impressive, what I just witnessed. The girl actually riding him. Never thought I'd see the day." Luna moved slightly closer to Diablo, her hand resting protectively on his neck. The stallion seemed to sense her unease, his ears flicking toward Rodriguez with suspicion. "Well, now you've seen it," Hector said. "If that's all—" "Actually," Rodriguez interrupted, "I'd like to make you another offer for the horse. 10,000 this time. Double what we agreed on before." Hector's eyebrows rose despite himself. 10,000 would solve a lot of problems for the ranch. It would cover the mortgage payments for months, pay off some of the outstanding debts, maybe even allow for repairs they'd been postponing. But before he could respond, Luna stepped forward, shaking her head emphatically. She pointed to Diablo, then to herself, then to the ground beneath their feet. The message was clear. The horse stays here. Rodriguez chuckled, though there was little humor in the sound. "I wasn't asking you, girl. This is business between men who understand the value of things." Luna's eyes flashed with something Hector hadn't seen in her before. Anger, perhaps, or determination. She reached for her notebook and wrote in large, bold letters, "Not for sale." "Luna," Hector said gently, "maybe we should discuss this." She turned to him, her expression so fierce that the words died in his throat. She wrote again, "He belongs here. With me. With us." Rodriguez's smile had disappeared entirely now. "Mendoza, control your ward. This is a serious offer. That horse could be worth even more with proper training. I have connections to show circuits, breeding programs. The answer is no. Hector interrupted, making his decision. Luna's right. Diablo stays here. Rodriguez's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Again. That girl won't be here forever, and then what? You'll be stuck with a half-trained stallion and a failing ranch. The words struck Hector like a physical blow, partly because they voiced his own unspoken fears. Luna would turn 18 eventually. She'd want to go to college, start her own life. And then what would become of Diablo? Of the ranch? I think it's time for you to leave, Hector said, working to keep his voice steady. Rodriguez studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. Have it your way. But my offer won't stand forever. Think about it, Mendoza. $10,000 could save this place. He glanced at Luna. Could give the girl a future too. With that parting shot, he turned and walked back to his truck. They watched in silence as he drove away, the dust settling slowly in his wake. Luna was still holding Diablo's lead rope, her knuckles white with tension. She looked at Hector questioningly, as if seeking reassurance that he truly meant what he'd said. He's staying, Hector confirmed quietly. This is his home now. The relief in Luna's eyes was immediate and profound. She reached for her notebook one more time, writing a simple message that somehow carried the weight of a promise. We'll make it work. Together. In the weeks that followed, Luna's work with Diablo progressed at an astonishing pace. Each day brought new achievements, the stallion learning to respond to subtle leg pressure, to change gaits smoothly, to turn and stop with barely perceptible cues. What had begun as basic training was evolving into something that resembled a dance, a wordless conversation between girl and horse. Hector found himself rearranging his daily schedule to watch their sessions whenever possible. There was something mesmerizing about the way they moved together, something that stirred a forgotten sense of wonder in him. He'd been around horses his entire life, but he'd never witnessed a connection like this, as if Luna and Diablo shared some secret language that transcended the usual boundaries between human and animal. She's got magic in her hands, Manuel commented one afternoon as they observed Luna guiding Diablo through a complex series of turns in the larger training ring they'd repaired specifically for these sessions. My father used to talk about horse whisperers in the old country. Never thought I'd actually see one. Hector nodded, understanding what Manuel meant. There was something almost mystical about Luna's gift, yet he'd also seen the practical reality behind it. The hours of patient work, the careful observation, the deep well of empathy that allowed her to understand what Diablo needed before he himself seemed to know. It wasn't magic, it was something rarer. Perfect attunement between two beings who had both known fear and loss, who had both been silent in their suffering. Luna herself was changing too. Though she still rarely spoke aloud to anyone but Diablo, her confidence had grown visibly. She moved with more assurance, met people's eyes more directly. Occasionally, when it was just the two of them in the quiet of evening, she would offer Hector a few whispered words, comments about Diablo's progress, questions about her mother, observations about the ranch. These moments of verbal connection, though brief, felt like precious gifts. Yet despite these positive developments, a shadow hung over Piedra Seca Ranch. Rodriguez's words about the failing property had cut closer to the truth than Hector cared to admit. He'd managed to make the most recent mortgage payment by selling off more cattle than he'd planned, but that was a temporary solution at best. Without substantial income, the ranch wouldn't survive another year. One evening, as Hector sat at his desk reviewing the increasingly grim financial statements, Luna appeared in the doorway. She watched him for a moment, then approached with her notebook. "Something wrong?" she wrote, her expression concerned. Hector sighed, too tired to maintain his usual stoic facade. "Just money troubles. Nothing for you to worry about." Luna frowned, clearly not satisfied with this answer. She wrote again, "Because you didn't sell Diablo." "Partly," Hector admitted. "But it's more than that. The drought these past few years, cattle prices dropping, repairs that can't be postponed any longer." He gestured vaguely at the paperwork spread before him. "It adds up." Luna studied him thoughtfully, then wrote, How can I help? The simple question touched Hector deeply. This girl, who had already lost so much, was offering what little she had to help save his struggling ranch. "You're already helping," he assured her. "What you're doing with Diablo, it's remarkable. But these problems have been building for years. They won't be solved overnight." Luna didn't seem discouraged. She wrote, "What if we showed people what Diablo can do? What if people paid to see him?" Hector raised his eyebrows. "You mean like exhibitions? Performance shows?" She nodded eagerly, writing, "He's special. People would come. Rodriguez offered money because he saw value. Others would too." It wasn't a bad idea, Hector had to admit. Diablo's transformation from unbreakable devil to responsive, elegant mount was the kind of story that captured people's imagination. The local interest they'd already seen, the slowing cars, the visitors with transparent excuses, suggested there might be a real audience for formal demonstrations. "It's worth considering," he said. "But that would mean you performing in front of crowds, being the center of attention. Would you be comfortable with that?" Luna's hesitation was brief but noticeable. She wrote, "For Diablo, for the ranch, I can do it." Hector felt a surge of pride in her courage, even as he worried about the pressure such public appearances might place on her. "Let me think about how we could make it work," he said. "No promises, but it's a good suggestion." Luna nodded, seemingly satisfied that he was taking her idea seriously. She turned to leave but paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she was gone, leaving Hector to wonder at the complicated young woman who had so unexpectedly become part of his life. The next morning, Hector woke to the sound of rain, a gentle, steady patter on the roof that had been absent for so long he'd almost forgotten its music. He stepped onto the porch, breathing in the sweet scent of moisture on dry earth, watching as the parched land eagerly absorbed the precious drops. It wasn't enough to end the drought, not by far, but it was a reprieve, a reminder that even the longest dry spells eventually broke. He found himself smiling as he went to the kitchen to start coffee, his spirits lifted by this small mercy from the skies. Luna was already there as usual, but instead of her textbooks, she had a newspaper spread on the table. She looked up as he entered, her expression urgent, and pushed the paper toward him. Hector glanced down at the headline, "Regional Horsemanship Exhibition Coming to San Miguel." Below was an article detailing an upcoming event just 30 miles away, a 3-day showcase of riding skills, training demonstrations, and equestrian talent, with cash prizes in various categories. "You want to enter this?" Hector asked, scanning the dates. The exhibition was less than 2 weeks away. Luna nodded emphatically, writing, "Perfect chance to show what Diablo can do. $5,000 first prize for advanced horsemanship demonstration." $5,000 wouldn't solve all their problems, but it would certainly help. Still, Hector had reservations. "Luna, this is a professional event. People train for months, years for competitions like this." She wrote confidently, "We're ready. Diablo is special, different from other horses. We can win." Her certainty was compelling, but Hector still hesitated. "There's an entry fee, and we'd need proper attire, transportation." He trailed off, mentally calculating costs they could ill afford. Luna was already writing, "Use my mother's insurance money. Still have most of it. My choice how to spend it." Hector was taken aback. Miguel had given him that money for Luna's expenses, and he'd been carefully setting most of it aside for her future education. "Luna, that's your money. For college, for your future." She shook her head firmly, writing, "This is my future. Diablo is my future. Please." There was such determination in her eyes, such certainty in her posture. Hector found himself nodding slowly. "All right, we'll enter. But we do this properly. Safe equipment, enough practice time, no unnecessary risks." Luna's smile was like the sunrise after a long night. She wrote quickly, "Thank you. Won't let you down." The days that followed were a flurry of preparation. Hector submitted their entry forms and fees, while Luna intensified her training sessions with Diablo. She worked with a single-minded focus, refining their communication, developing a routine that would showcase the stallion's intelligence and responsiveness. Manuel helped construct obstacles for practice, barrels to navigate, poles to step over, a small bridge Diablo needed to cross without hesitation. Luna tackled each challenge methodically, breaking down complex movements into simple steps, building Diablo's confidence along with his skills. Hector found himself increasingly involved, offering suggestions based on his years of experience with horses, helping Luna understand what judges might be looking for. In the evenings, they would sit at the kitchen table, sketching out routines, discussing strategy, planning every detail of their presentation. 3 days before the exhibition, with their preparations nearly complete, disaster struck. Hector was awakened before dawn by Manuel pounding on his door, his voice urgent. "Boss, come quick, it's Diablo." Hector threw on clothes and raced outside, his heart hammering. Manuel led him to the stallion's corral, where Diablo was standing awkwardly, his right hind leg raised, clearly unable to put weight on it. "Found him like this when I came to feed," Manuel explained, his face grim. "Looks bad." Hector entered the corral carefully, approaching the stallion with slow, deliberate movements. Diablo was clearly in pain, his eyes wide, his breathing rapid. When Hector tried to examine the leg, the stallion flinched away, a low groan escaping him. "Get Dr. Vasquez on the phone," Hector instructed Manuel. "Tell him it's an emergency." At that moment, Luna appeared, her face pale with fear. She rushed to Diablo's side, her hands gentle as she stroked his neck, murmuring reassurances. The stallion seemed to calm slightly at her presence, though his posture remained tense with pain. "Something's wrong with his leg," Hector explained quietly. "We've called the vet." Luna's eyes filled with tears as she examined Diablo's stance. She reached for her notebook with shaking hands and wrote, "What happened?" "I don't know," Hector admitted. "Could have twisted it somehow during the night. Could have been bitten by something. We won't know until Dr. Vasquez takes a look." The wait for the veterinarian was agonizing. Luna refused to leave Diablo's side, continuing to stroke and comfort him, occasionally singing softly, a sound Hector had never heard from her before, a gentle melody that seemed to ease the stallion's distress. When Dr. Vasquez finally arrived, his examination was thorough, but his expression grew increasingly serious. "There's significant swelling in the fetlock," he reported. "Could be a sprain, could be a tear in the tendons. Won't know for sure without x-rays." "How serious is it?" Hector asked, dreading the answer. The veterinarian sighed. "Best case scenario, a minor sprain that heals with rest. Worst case, permanent lameness. At minimum, he needs complete rest for at least 3 to 4 weeks. No riding, no training, minimal movement." Luna's face crumpled at these words. 3 to 4 weeks. The exhibition would be long over by then. All their preparations, all their hopes, suddenly meaningless. But more than the lost opportunity, Hector knew she was feeling Diablo's pain as if it were her own. The bond between them had grown so deep that his suffering was hers too. As Dr. Vasquez administered anti-inflammatory medications and wrapped the injured leg, Luna stood nearby, silent tears streaming down her face. The sight of her grief pierced Hector's heart. Without thinking, he put his arm around her shoulders, offering what comfort he could. "He'll be okay," he murmured. "Diablo's strong. We'll get him through this." Luna turned her face into his shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. For the first time since her arrival at the ranch, she seemed truly broken by circumstance, not just quiet or reserved, but devastated. In that moment, as the rain continued to fall and Diablo stood injured before them, the future of Piedra Seca Ranch seemed darker than ever. The days following Diablo's injury were dark ones at Piedra Seca Ranch. Luna spent every moment she could beside the stallion, often sleeping on a blanket outside his stall at night, afraid to leave him alone with his pain. Though Dr. Vasquez's treatment seemed to be helping, the swelling gradually subsiding, Diablo becoming more comfortable, the exhibition was now impossible. The opportunity for financial relief had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Hector did his best to maintain normal operations, but his concern was divided between the injured horse, the silent girl whose heart seemed broken, and the ever-mounting bills that threatened to take everything he had left. He'd received another notice from the bank, more formal this time, with explicit mention of foreclosure proceedings if the next payment wasn't made in full. One evening, about a week after Diablo's injury, Hector found Luna in her usual spot beside the stallion. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes, her clothes rumpled from too many hours of vigilance. "You need rest," he said gently. "He's improving. You don't have to watch him every minute." Luna shook her head stubbornly, though the weariness in her posture was undeniable. She wrote in her notebook, "My fault." "Your fault?" Hector frowned. "How could Diablo's injury possibly be your fault?" She wrote again, her hand trembling slightly. "Pushed too hard. Too much training. Too fast." "Luna, no." Hector knelt beside her, making sure she met his eyes. "This wasn't your doing. Horses get injured. It happens, even with the best care. You've been nothing but gentle and patient with him." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could wipe them away. She wrote, "The exhibition was our chance. Now the ranch will fail. Because of me." So that was it. Not just guilt over Diablo's injury, but the weight of responsibility for the ranch's financial crisis. Hector felt his heart ache for her. This child, who had already lost so much, was now blaming herself for circumstances far beyond her control. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "The ranch's problems started long before you arrived. They're not your burden to carry, and they're certainly not your fault." Luna looked unconvinced. She wrote, "But I gave you hope." Then it disappeared. Hector couldn't deny the truth in her words. Her success with Diablo, the possibility of the exhibition prize, these had indeed kindled hope where there had been none. But that wasn't her failure. It was life's unpredictability, the same force that had brought her to his door in the first place. "Hope is never wasted," he said softly, "even when things don't work out as planned." He gently took the notebook from her hands, setting it aside. Then, with a tenderness that surprised even himself, he pulled her into a hug. For a moment, she remained stiff in his embrace, unused to such contact. Then, gradually, she relaxed against him, her thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "It's going to be okay," he murmured, though he had no idea how that could be true. "We'll figure something out. Together." As he held this grieving, silent girl, Hector realized something had shifted between them. She was no longer just Carmen's daughter, a temporary ward he'd reluctantly accepted. Somehow, without his noticing, Luna had become family, someone he cared for deeply, someone whose pain he felt as his own. The next morning, Hector woke to the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines by the sound of it. Frowning, he quickly dressed and stepped onto the porch to find 3 trucks and a horse trailer pulling up to the ranch house. His heart sank when he recognized Rodriguez's black truck in the lead. This was the last thing they needed right now, another attempt to buy Diablo, more pressure they couldn't withstand. But as the vehicles parked and people began to emerge, Hector realized this wasn't just Rodriguez. There was Dr. Vasquez, the veterinarian, and Miguel, his brother, and several other people he recognized from town, the feed store owner, a retired horse trainer, even the banker who held his mortgage. "What's going on?" he asked, as Rodriguez approached, the others hanging back slightly. "Heard about your stallion's injury," Rodriguez said without preamble, "and about the exhibition you were planning to enter." Hector stiffened. "News travels fast." "Small community," Rodriguez shrugged. "Look, Mendoza, I'm not here to gloat or to try to buy your horse again. I'm here because what that girl did with Diablo, it was remarkable, something special." Hector didn't know how to respond to this unexpected tone from his usual adversary. Before he could formulate a reply, Luna appeared beside him, her expression guarded as she recognized Rodriguez. "The thing is," Rodriguez continued, addressing them both now, That exhibition isn't the only opportunity around. There's a bigger one. The Southwest Equestrian Showcase in Santa Fe next month. Much larger prizes, more recognition. Diablo's injured, Hector pointed out. He won't be ready to perform by then. No, but he could be ready to appear, Rodriguez countered. Not in competition, but as an exhibition. The miracle stallion and the girl who tamed him. The organizers would pay for that kind of story. Luna's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope crossing her face. And why would you care about that? Hector asked, still suspicious of Rodriguez's motives. The younger rancher seemed genuinely uncomfortable for a moment. Because I was wrong about the horse, and about you, both of you. He glanced at Luna. What you accomplished deserves recognition, and frankly, it could be good business for all of us in the region to have that kind of talent associated with our ranches. Miguel stepped forward then. It's not just Rodriguez, Hector. We've all been talking. What Luna did with Diablo, it's extraordinary. People would pay to see that, to learn from it. Dr. Vasquez nodded in agreement. I've been in veterinary medicine for 30 years, and I've never seen a transformation like the one Luna achieved with that stallion. There's real value there, educational value, commercial value. Hector looked from face to face, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. What exactly are you proposing? Rodriguez gestured to the group behind him. We're proposing a partnership, joint investment in what could become a training center here at Piedra Seca, with Luna as the centerpiece, if she's willing. Luna's expression was a mixture of disbelief and cautious excitement. She reached for her notebook, writing quickly, "What about Diablo?" "He'll be your demonstration horse once he's healed," Rodriguez explained. "And in the meantime, there are other horses that could benefit from your methods. Plenty of so-called problem horses that traditional trainers have given up on." Hector felt dizzy with the possibilities suddenly opening before them. This would require significant investment. The ranch needs repairs, proper facilities. "That's where we come in," said the banker, stepping forward. "The community is prepared to back this venture. Loans with favorable terms, investment capital from those who can afford it." He smiled slightly. "We protect our own here, Mendoza. Always have." Hector was momentarily speechless. After years of struggling alone, of watching his dreams slowly crumble, help was suddenly being offered from the most unexpected quarters. Luna tugged at his sleeve, showing him what she'd written. "Can we do this? Is it real?" He looked at her, this quiet, determined girl who had changed everything with her arrival, who had seen value in a wild stallion everyone else had written off, who had found her voice in more ways than one on his failing ranch. "It's real if we want it to be," he said softly. Over the next several hours they talked details, investment amounts, ownership percentages, timelines for development. Miguel offered legal guidance, having dealt with similar business formations in the city. Dr. Vasquez discussed Diablo's treatment plan and prognosis, which was more optimistic than Hector had dared hope. The feed store owner knew a contractor who could begin barn renovations immediately. Throughout the discussions, Luna remained mostly silent, as was her way, but her presence was far from passive. She wrote questions, offered suggestions, made her preferences clear. This was, after all, centered around her unique gift. Everyone understood that without her, there would be no opportunity at all. By late afternoon, the foundations of an agreement had been established. The visitors departed, leaving Hector and Luna alone on the porch as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Well," Hector said, still somewhat dazed by the day's developments. "That was unexpected." Luna smiled. A real, unguarded smile that transformed her solemn face. Then, in a voice that was soft but steady, no longer a whisper, she said, "Like Diablo. Sometimes the things that seem most broken just need someone to believe in them." Hector stared at her in wonder, not just at the words themselves, but at the fact that she had spoken them aloud, clearly, directly to him. It felt like a gift, a sign of trust so profound it left him momentarily speechless. "Your mother would be proud of you," he managed finally. "So proud." Luna nodded, tears shining in her eyes. I think she sent me here on purpose, to you, to this place." "I think maybe she did," Hector agreed, his own vision blurring slightly. Together they walked to the stable to check on Diablo. The stallion greeted them with a soft nicker, his eyes bright, his injured leg held gingerly but no longer trembling with pain. He extended his proud neck over the stall door, seeking Luna's touch, which she gave freely, her fingers gentle on his forehead. "We're going to be okay," she told the horse, her voice growing more confident with each word. "All of us." As the last light of day gilded the weathered buildings of Piedra Seca Ranch, Hector felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope, but certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. A once silent girl, a once wild stallion, and a rancher who had nearly forgotten how to believe in second chances. Some broken things, once mended, became stronger at the broken places. Perhaps the same could be true of broken dreams, broken hearts, and even broken silences.